This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. 8 years ago this month on Deconstructing Comics, I talked with Austin Tichenor of the Reduced Shakespeare Company about the intersections between comics and the theater. In April 2011, John Roberson joined me on the podcast to discuss the same topic with completely different results. Those episodes are on our site, and I'll link to them from the show notes. This week, we come at the topic of comics and the theater from a completely different angle. Plays about comics creators. You'll hear my discussion with Lenny Schwartz, a playwright in Rhode Island who specializes in bioplays, plays about the lives of individuals. Alongside plays on several Hollywood greats, Lenny has also written about Bill Finger, who until recently was the totally uncredited co-creator of Batman, and about Charles Schulz of Peanuts fame. He's also working on a play about Steve Ditko, who of course was the original artist on Spider-Man and actually did much of the writing as well. Lenny and I talk about just how much credit Bob Kane and Stan Lee might actually deserve for the stories credited to them, and about how Charles Schulz used Peanuts as a journal of his life. Lenny shares some stories about the rather unusual people who appear out of the woodwork when questions arise about the rights to imagery, and much more. But first, you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and other costs of presenting this show every week. All right, I'm talking to Lenny Schwartz, who is in Rhode Island, right?
Hey, Rhode Island, yeah. I'm in North Situate, Rhode Island. If anyone knows where that is, you get a prize.
I never understood why it was called Rhode Island when it's not an island.
Well, that's the other thing, too. And it's like, it's not. And it's kind of like Long Island in New York. It's not an island, but, I think they were like, I think because it's so small, I think they're like, well, we need two words. And they just came up with anything, People were either drunk or were like, there's a road, and like, it's like, what else do we do? Someone screamed out island, like they had Tourette's or something.
So it's a form of compensating?
Yeah, basically, yeah. It's not terribly. We are the smallest state, of course, but I think even back then, I think people had compensation problems, probably. So, especially our forefathers. Some insight for those comic fans out there.
Yeah. Okay, so explain who you are, what your background is, what you do.
Well, basically, what I am, I'm a writer. I started off being a playwright about 20 years back, and I usually do about 2 to 3 shows a year. I've been published. I've been doing all sorts of things. With that, doing theater in different states. I do some in Rhode Island. I run a theater, help run a theater in West Warwick, which nobody knows where that is, but it's if you're in Rhode Island, it's 10 minutes away, and from where I am. And I've been since have gone to New York City, and I've done theater off Broadway, off Broadway. I usually do about 2 to 3 shows in New York City a year as well. I've been very fortunate also to get involved with screenplays, and I've had a lot of independent, low budget films. And I actually have 3 in production right now that are just actually starting. One's actually filming, and one's actually about to be filmed in January, and then another one in July of next year. Wow. But I am also on IMDb too, so it's it's been I constantly have so many scripts in the works. I was actually writing before we started this conversation, and I was like, I got to finish up what I have to do, and try to write. But and I do different plays, and my latest thing, the reason why Tim had asked me to be on here was because I had written a play about Bill Finger, and I've been I always try to. One of the things I feel like there hasn't been as much is a lot of crossover between comic books and theater a lot. So I said that might be kind of interesting. So
yeah, a long time ago.
It seems to be.
A long time ago, I did an episode with a theater guy about kind of the crossover of comics and theater, and we came up with some musicals that were based on comics, like Annie or Lil Abner or Charlie Brown. But your approach is not that. You're not adapting comics. You're writing plays about creators of comics, which I don't think I've ever seen anyone else do.
The only other play I think I've seen it done, it's by a lovely woman that I'm friends with. Her name is Crystal Skillman and Fred Van Lent. Fred writes for Valiant Comics. I don't know. He's also written for DC and Marvel.
Yeah, Fred Van Lent. He's been on our show.
Has he really? He's a great guy, actually, Fred Van Lent. Yeah, he's a really good guy. But both of them have wrote a play called King Kirby, actually, and it was actually about Jack Kirby. It's a wonderful play. They actually, I didn't get to see it in New York, but they actually sent me a copy of it. And it's been around for a little bit. Fred's a very good writer, and Crystal's a very good writer. I think that's the only one I've ever actually seen, doing those things. And it's funny because I've been writing these bio plays, and now I'm getting hired to do all these bio plays. I started off doing bio plays in 2011, based off a failed screenplay that I had written about Buster Keaton, actually. And the Buster Keaton script was something I had written as a screenplay. I'd been writing it for 12 years. Nothing's coming up of it, and I was like, all right, well, I'll just do it as a play, as like a one-off thing. It was a huge hit. Like, everyone, to this very day, people ask me to redo the show, and some people have, expressed interest in it, and they do things, and so then I said, all right, well, it's got to be like a trilogy or something like that. So then the year after, I did a play about the Marx Brothers, and that was even a bigger hit. And then so I said, all right, well, I might as well make it a trilogy, like I said about doing bio plays. And I did a play about Lucille Ball, and I just blew both of those out of the water. So they became these huge successes. And I said, okay, I'm always been saying, like, I'm going to do one more bio play, because I actually do other plays besides that. Like I've written a play comedy called Social Avenger. Which won an award in New York. I wrote a play called Subject 62, which won another award, and it's been produced around the country, in different places. And so I said Lucille Ball will be my last thing, unless I can. There's only 3 other subjects I'll ever do in my life, and actually it ended up being 4, unless someone's paying me to do them, and unless they're paying me to do it. I do get paid to do theater. I get paid to do screenplays, but for my purposes at that time, it was kind of like, if someone's paying me like a good amount of money, I get this amount of money, but if I get this amount of money, maybe I'll like do it. And like I just got hired to do and it's coming out here in March, a play about Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. The money was right, so I'm like, I didn't have an exact passion to do it, but I did enjoy the subject matter, so I actually wrote a bio play about them. I'm not directing it, thank God, but at that time, when I finished up the Lucille Ball play, this was back in 2014, I think we took it to New York, I said to myself, I'm only going to do, unless I can get the rights to do a play about Charles Schulz, then I'll write a bio play about that. And so I wrote a play about Charles Schulz because I got permission to do it, and I got the permission to use the title, The Man Who Saw Snoopy. And, that was another big hit. It actually helped us fund a new theater space, which is pretty cool. And so I said to myself, okay, the last time I said, someone was like, what's your next bio play going to be? I'm like, I'm not doing it. Unless, 2 things, I always said this, unless I get to do a play about Bill Finger, and, or a play about Kevin Eastman, actually. And Kevin Eastman, the creator, creator of the Ninja Turtles, because his life is insane. If you ever want to talk about somebody, but I said I'll never get the rights to do it. So in 2014, I went to the San Diego Comic Convention. I go every year, try to get down there, and in the booth was actually Athena Finger, Bill Finger's granddaughter. Yeah. And I just kind of bumped into her, and it's like the most random encounter. And we just kind of hit it off.
And Athena Finger is like his only living descendant, right?
His only living descendant. And, funny enough, so this is a really wild story about this, because, funny enough, she's the only living relative. We hit it off wonderfully. And I said, I would love to do a play about Bill Finger. I said, it's always been on my bucket list. And I never would find the right. And she's like, well, you should talk to this person who ended up being Mark Tyler Nobleman. I don't know if you know who he is.
I ran across his blog yesterday, but I don't really know what he is exactly, Nobleman.
Yeah, he is actually, and if you need the contact information to talk to him, he's someone you should talk to as well. He actually wrote a book about Bill Finger. It's a children's book, actually, that was actually drawn by Ty Templeton. And Bill, and he's like, Mark was very supportive of my play. He was very, very wonderful. Athena was very supportive, and I'm like, all right, well, if I'm having these supports, Mark was actually the gentleman who did all this research about Bill Finger, and put it into a children's book, and consistently, pounding the pavement, and so I sent him an email. I said, hey, Mark, I'd like to write a play. And he came back and forth and said, use whatever research you can find. This is all public domain, anything I can help with. Mark was so wonderful, and Athena was so wonderful, and also a gentleman named Arlen Schumer. If you get a chance to talk to him, he's wonderful, man. He actually sent me some stuff too that I was like, okay, this seems like the right thing I should do. So I said, all right, this will be my last bio play of all time. I promise you, this is the last one I'm directing. And so I had done it, and it came out. The place it was kind of not just. I wanted to do a screenplay about it too. So I think that'd be one of the best films you've ever seen. It's a movie about Bill Finger. Oh my God, that'd be amazing, And then I'm still writing the screenplay on, and hopefully, it does get produced one day. And the play went up, and I was very happy with it. But I also felt at the time, like, I have a better story to do than this. It was very well received, but I actually want to make. At that time, I was kind of like, I can make this something even more, not commercial, but more for just more sculpted, basically. So,
well, let me ask you.
We did that.
So, what was your interest in Bill Finger? Why was that on your bucket list?
Oh, my God! I want to talk about one of the most amazing stories ever that happened in comic books that nobody talked about. You had a guy who, two friends. One Bill Finger was working for Bob Kane, and you had two guys who he hired him as a writer, Bob Kane. Bob Kane was a very wealthy guy, came from wealth basically. And they were both in the comics field. And one day he comes in, DC Comics says, hey, I would like you to create this character, based on the success of Superman. He says, I'll have something for you Monday. Goes home, he says, goes to Bill Finger, and he says, hey, this is idea for a character, and it's let me just Batman.
Break in. Yeah, so you mentioned Superman. Superman had hit in 1938, and so all the other comic companies are like, oh, we got to get on that bandwagon. Let's make our own superheroes. Yep. So this is around 38, 39 when this happens, when Kane and Finger are talking.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're talking, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable, So he shows his friend Bill Finger the picture, and it looks just like Superman. It actually looks like he has like a little mask, a little domino mask, kind of looks like a Flash Gordon, kind of red suited. He goes, this is Batman.
With
so
bat
Bill
wings.
Finger looks. Yeah, exactly. And he's like, well, this guy. He says, let's talk about this. He says, well, here's the problem. He says, this is the problem I have with that. He goes, you want to make he goes through and he literally makes everything that is Batman, everything that makes Batman cool, he designs. Bill Finger's like, okay, well, you want to get rid of the color pattern, you want to make it, gray and all these things, and you want to make them look
red.
Yeah, and it looks like it makes him look like the Batman we know today. You want to call him Bruce Wayne, you want to do this, you want to do this, and takes his creation and over the sitting there makes what we know as Batman today. That's 77 years later that everybody's still looking at. He makes everything in that room in that time period. And then what does Bob Kane do? He goes to DC Comics on Monday and he sells that without mentioning his friend. And it just became this story of unbelievable torment of this guy's entire life, basically. So imagine that you basically create what is Batman at this point, and then you go back to work for this guy who's Bob Kane wasn't a very nice gentleman to Bill Finger, and it's he'd come in. He yelled at him for scripts being late, all these things. Didn't treat him very well, didn't treat him like this.
Right, well, he had hired Finger to ghostwrite things, right? That was part of the agreement, right?
Yeah.
That he wouldn't have his name on anything.
He wouldn't have his name on anything. And, that was the agreement. That was the contract that Bill Finger made. But I don't think I think at that time you have to realize, like, you have to figure these comic books were probably a fad. That's what they're kind of thinking. And I'm sure thinking was kind of that prevalent. I never think he thought in a million years that what he created would be this. But
right? Yeah, it was going to be a
happened,
flash in the pan. They probably thought.
Yeah, a flash in the pan. Even Bob Kane, but Bob Kane, had those lawyers, and he made this airtight contract on Bill Finger. And what ended up happening with that, though, was that, so as life went along, Bob Kane, kept trying to be wealthy, kept all these things, and Bill Finger, back in the 70s, he died in a room, penniless and alone, not able even to pay his bills. He was being evicted, I think, when he was dying. And that's, my friend Arlen said something really amazing, where he saw Bob Kane at a convention, and everything was like, oh, I did this, I created Batman, I did this. And while this convention was going on, basically, probably in the same, probably like not even like 10 miles away, there's this poor guy dying, trying to survive, penniless and alone. And at that point, Bob Kane was in a position to help out his friend, and he didn't. And and my friend Arlen said that was the most unforgivable thing he's ever heard of. But that if you look at this guy's life, it's this very interesting story of, what he had to do every day to kind of get going. And then imagine you create this thing, and as you go along, you're turning on the TV, and there's the thing you came up with, the Batman 1966 show. There's the thing you came up with on the television, and you don't have any claim to it.
Yeah, other than the one script that Finger wrote for the Batman show, the Clock King.
Exactly, yeah. The Clock King, whatever it was, the Clock. Yeah.
So
there was that, and that was the one time he saw his name even like anything associated with Batman.
But not as creator of the characters.
Not creator, just like someone who wrote this. I mean, you can imagine the things you had to go through every day. So that was my interest. I always like underdog stories, and I think that is probably it's probably one of the most horrifying stories in comic creation. I mean, you can say like even like the Superman people at that point, but they at least got that credit, and at least every time Superman appears, yeah, that's what it is, So I understand that, but he was just forgotten about, And and when I met Athena, I mean, she would tell me like how painful it is to think about that not only that no one believes you, but the world is against you. At that point.
Now she was born 2 years after he died, right? He died in 1974, yep. And so she never met him.
She never met him, but what's funny is that, funny enough, this is how like wild this is. His Bill Finger's son Fred. Is her father, and he actually, her mother actually lives in Boston. She's a professor at MIT. I won't give you her name or anything. But funny enough, she has a sister. From her mother had another daughter with somebody else, and her name's Alicia. She actually lives about 10 miles away from me. Actually, this is amazing. And our kids are the same age. It's just like this weird thing, But yeah, it was a very compelling story, dramatically and everything. The thing that happened though, and I said there was something missing about the play. I couldn't figure out what it was, so I was trying to prep it. This was back in 2015 for a New York. To let it go down in New York and had it be, I'll say I have a better version of it. So I started rewriting it a bit. And then my entire script changed at that point, because what ended up happening is that Bill Finger got the credit. And so finally...
Yeah, just like a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah, it was last September. And actually my show actually had to be rewritten because it was invalidated, basically, which was probably the best thing that's ever happened to a show. But
there's a happy ending now, kind of.
Yeah, I had the ending. I had a totally different ending, but it just tipped things off into another direction now. So I had to refigure out what I wanted to do with it. And I think I have it now to be something that would be better than what I had. Basically, it was about 90% where it was, and then the ending changed and everything. And I was like, oh no! So I'm like, so I rewrote about 40 pages of it, and I'm actually finishing up for next year sometime. I want to put it on in 2017 in the New York City, but I'm just kind of waiting to figure out what that plan will be for that one as well.
So, what were your sources for writing the play?
What's that?
Well, your sources when you were doing your research.
My sources are for that. I will tell you right straight up was Mark Nobleman's blog. Arlen Schumer's. He has a bunch of research. He was very helpful in that. Athena herself, who could fill in the gaps. Another gentleman actually wrote a play, but it was mostly it had a lot of young people in their high school times. His name is Roberto Williams. He had done a play called Fathers of the Dark Knight, and it was Bill Finger was a character. It was kind of like it showed the beginnings of Batman, but also showed Batman on stage. It was like, all these other things, like, kind of combined live action fighting with like the history and everything. And he had done that in New York. And what was funny was I was, as soon as I heard about it, I was like, oh, Roberto, I don't want to step on your toes. And we found our plays were completely different things. Like, you couldn't have anything more different. And so then Roberto invited me over to his house for dinner, and we spent like 6 hours talking. And he had some interesting research things he had found me. And what's amazing about this is how many people reached out and were like, "Oh, cool! This is something. How many people? This is something that we want to contribute to." And it's probably going to be one of the few plays where I can actually say I want to redirect this and redo it again and do it even better in New York. Because I feel the story is still very important, even though he got the credit and everything. Now the story becomes about something else that is actually much more powerful, and I figured out what that is. So now it's a matter of implementing it. I'm very excited about it. I actually found an actor who looks just like Bob Kane, and it's amazing. So he not only looks just like Bob Kane, but sounds like a young Bob Kane too. So, and I'm like, oh my God, you're like a miracle from God. Thank you. Don't ever change. So, but yeah, so I'm very excited about that coming up. So that will be probably in 2017. I'm guessing either summer. My big goal would be actually to take it to one of the big comic conventions like New York and San Diego. And I've been kind of emailing them back and forth, and I'm like, what would it take to do this? So
yeah, that would be something. I can't remember ever hearing of a performance like that at a convention, a comics convention.
Well, that's what I was thinking. So my goal was with this, and if I can get it out there, hey, why not? I would love to do it in 2017 in the summer. And worst case scenario, I put a Kickstarter online. I'm sure people would donate. If not, I'd find a way. I think that would be so cool to see that show performed in front of people. And so I've actually rewritten it to be hour and 25 minutes, just because the other play was longer, but I actually have a really good take on it that I think people would really respond to. It would be not only historically accurate, it would not only be a learning experience, but it'd be very, very entertaining and very, very sinister what people used to do to each other back in those times.
Yeah.
So I really wanted. I think people would love that.
I wanted to ask you about the history, because looking around online, I was a little confused about kind of the situation here at the time that Batman was created. So it seems that this guy Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, he had started like. Did he start several different comics publishers that merged, or how did that work?
As far as...
Because I guess there was Detective Comics, and there was, Adventure Comics or something. There were several different national comics.
National comics. Well, yeah, with DC Comics and all that.
I mean, they merged and became DC eventually, but they were all started by the same guy?
They were all started by the same guy. I think he was just like trying to, as far as I could see, and this is maybe this is more of Arlen's thing. I didn't focus so much on the history of that point, as far as like where they were. But if I remember correctly, I mean, a lot of this stuff is just sketchy, as far as like when what appeared when and everything and who had what. But I think my thing was, it's kind of like a guy who's like, well, I can start this company, or I can start this company, whatever one's more profitable, basically. That's how I always took it as, but I could be completely wrong. That might be I hate to say, like a Fred Van Lente question. He probably would know better than I would on that. It's just you dig deep enough and you go through things, but no one's keeping records, basically,
Right, these comics companies were just kind of appearing and disappearing at random.
Yeah. Well, what's funny to me, though, was that I'm actually doing a play about Steve Ditko right now. Mm-hmm. And what I found very fascinating about especially the early Marvel comics, was that, you look at everything that was going on. There were so I'm reading this stuff, and I'm reading the old comics, and I got all these like reprints, and I actually found a place online where you can actually, see the original comics from like that are in public domain and everything like that, from Charlton with Steve Ditko. What I found though, Martin Goodman, the guy who was, his wife was Martin Goodman, the publisher of Marvel Comics at the time. Basically, his wife was Stan Lee's first cousin, and they hired Stan. He was running the business and everything. And there was a time, I guess, where Stan was in the '60s. You read the Marvel Comics, especially the letters page. He's talking about the bullpen and everything. He's talking about the bullpen. And we're doing this research, and he's like, "Oh, there's all these people here." He did a record, talking about it. Stan Lee went into the office 3 times a week.
Yeah, it was all fiction.
It was all fiction. It wasn't even just the comics that were fiction. Everything he made up was complete and utter. It was amazing. If you look at this, he's like talking about this, talking about the big thing. I mean, now of course it is. Now it's like what Stanley was always talking about. But people were like, "Oh, the bullpen is this." The guy just literally went home and he was like, "Yeah," and It was so amazing. Martin Goodman eventually left Marvel Comics because I was reading all these things Steve Ditko was talking about, and Steve Ditko was like, "Yeah, it's funny. I worked with this guy for 10 years. If he walked by me, I wouldn't know who he was. He published my comics, and then I guess he went to Atlas Seaboard Comics. I don't know if you ever heard of this one. And Martin Goodman was the publisher for these guys for Atlas the Seaboard. What was funny was, I guess, that, and this is what I'm trying to decipher now, I guess Atlas was once the name of Marvel Comics, actually.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he's like, and I read somewhere Steve Ditko was like, "Yeah, he hired me, Martin Company." He goes, "I don't even know, if you ever met him at that point either." So I just find this there's so much in the comics field. The more you get into it, the more it'd be fun to watch. I would love to spend time just on Tangle, what actually happened, because there's so much that doesn't make sense. Where does this go? Even as far as the early, the late '80s and early '90s, there's so much with the Valiant comics and everything that you want to find out the story, but nobody's ever talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. If you ever get a chance to figure out Valiant comics, if they ever were bigger, I'd write a play about them. So I'm sure that's insanity.
Yeah.
I did the research what happened in the '90s.
Also about Bob Kane. So I didn't see any date attached to this, but so at the point when Bob Kane signs over the rights to Batman and he insists on getting sole credit for creating the character, did that happen in '38 or did that happen later?
That was '38 actually.
Or '39, I should say.
It's a '39. Yeah, he basically, his father had, and I can bring up my show because I actually have it in there. His father had lawyers, and they were just we want. It's kind of like, I think he probably, if I would be speculative and say what Bob Kane actually did, I think he was looking at the example of someone like Chester Gould, or the comic strip guys, basically, who are just they own like this. Even Will Eisner, I think probably was. I don't know if Will Eisner was doing Spirit at that point. I have to look at my dates, but I think he knew there's money. I get the idea that Bob Kane was always about Bob Kane. That's been always my research of things. He's always about Bob Kane, Bob Kane this and Bob Kane that. He only talk about himself in the third person. But what I think ended up happening was he knew if there was a money opportunity, he would make it happen. So I think if you really look at it, I think he went in with the idea of okay, had he made for his entire life $500. Or if he made $5 million, it wouldn't have mattered. He just wanted. He just knew if. I think he was at that point. It was he was kind of all right. Well, I want this. If this is going to be successful, then it's this. It could be crap, but I'm still going to own this. It's crap, And I think that's the mentality he kind of went into. It was that he wanted to make a name for himself, and he had to figure out the way to do it. I don't think he knew how big Batman would ever be, but I think he came with the idea, well, it could be, whereas everybody else was, all right, this is kind of a fad, and that's kind of, this will die down in 10 minutes, maybe or something, but I think he might have been the person to think about it and say, hey, you know what, this could be this, and I think he maybe had the foresight. Say what you want about Bob's ego, but he wasn't dumb. To do that. Everybody else was kind of well, this is going to be this, And they didn't think about things, I don't think, as much as they did back then. But
Yeah.
I think he did a little bit more than other people.
Mm-hmm.
I think he wasn't thinking about the comics field. I think he was thinking about like maybe the patent field or something like that. Like he was
Right.
inventing
Yeah.
with another toaster.
The rights.
You know. so I think that's where his head was. I think that's why the whole thing might have happened too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So in Mark Nobleman's review of your play on his blog, he mentions a line of the play spoken by Bill's first wife, Portia Finger. Bob Kane didn't do anything to you. You did this to yourself. So what's your thought? How much of this is a story of Kane being selfish versus Bill Finger not standing up for himself?
I think it's a 50-50 thing, actually, to be honest with you. And I know that's probably not going to be a popular thing to say, but I think that, I mean, at a certain point, I mean, he did. I think the play, the way it was initially formed, is going to change a little bit when we do it again. But the version I think I really liked, the thing I really liked in this version was that I actually do believe that. I actually believe that, I think it kind of, to give you an example from the play, that kind of a subtle thing. In the beginning, it's kind of like, oh yeah, someone might mention something about Batman. It's like, yeah, I write for Batman. I created Batman. People are like, oh, that kind of thing. And then as the play goes along, people are like, oh my God, it's Batman. It's like Batman. It's like kind of dig deeper. So I think at a certain point, yes, I think that in a sense he let it get to himself, and he didn't speak up his mind for many reasons. Number one, back then I don't think fandom wasn't what it was back then. But number two is that I think there's there came a certain point where he was more involved with self-loathing and drinking and all those things, and he really decided to not when the whole thing happened, I'm sure he was kicking himself silently, whether or not he was outwardly doing it. I think, and I think that carried on to his life. I think it privately ate away at him. As Batman became more and more popular, he started to realize how much this is actually affecting him. And that's why, I can just even imagine what that's like, if I created something, look at it this way. He was just a regular guy living a regular life. And regular guy living a regular life, and then as his life went on, the circumstances around him became bigger and bigger. Batman TV show, Batman in the 50s, Batman everywhere at a certain point, And as he's watching this thing get bigger and bigger, he realizes he has no claim on it, and not, I can just even imagine, but then. Instead of trying to say he had no legal claim at all, so he had to watch this. I think he kind of dug himself into a hole. I think that he never got out of. I do believe that Bob Kane is also responsible for a lot of that too, where he could have went over at any point and been like, even while Bill Finger was alive, and been like, look, even when he died, he could have been like, look, this is what this guy did. And, this is what this guy did, and whether or not they're saying it, this is what he did. He didn't need to do it after he died. He didn't need to, say, they would have kept giving him money. They wouldn't even change the name. He just didn't, if you look at it, that's where the real crime comes in, is that Bob Kane could have been like, at any point, been like, something, this guy did this, and, this is what it is.
Yeah, well, I guess he did, 15 years after Bill Finger died. It was kind of late, but...
Yeah, he did at that point, but it was like, I wish he did get the credit, but even then...
he didn't actually change the contract or something even then. It was still just created by Bob Kane.
Yeah, exactly. But he knew what he did, I think, at a certain point. I think as he get older, he's like, man, I wish I did that. I think from all accounts that, I've actually seen Bob Kane myself, and I never get a really warm impression for him. But I think what's interesting is I think that whole story chipped away at him a little bit, and I think he knew he had done something that was like, it's kind of like, well, legally I did this, but I think it kind of ate away at him as well. As near at the end, not like it changed his life completely or anything, or gave this, but it had to have. But again, comics have a very interesting thing. And maybe it's the people who create them have very high opinions of themselves. But if I'm doing the Steve Ditko play, and I got to tell you, I'm doing research with Stan Lee, and even Stan Lee at a certain point, who I think Stan Lee deserves every bit of credit. I'll say that immediately. Every bit of credit that Stan Lee has gotten, I think he does deserve. I think he's done a lot for the comic book industry. I think he's really fought for people. I think I think the stuff he's done over the years, I do believe he's done that. That being said, there comes a point, too, where even he can't admit that, like, okay, this is what Steve Ditko did, or this is what Jack Kirby did. He was like, there's actually an interview. I don't know if you've ever seen the Steve Ditko documentary that's online.
No.
The one with Jonathan Ross and Neil Gaiman.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a documentary online where he's talking about Steve Ditko, and there's this hour-long BBC special, and they're talking about it, and again, maybe it's a comic book thing or not, but he's like, back in 1999, Steve was so upset at Stan Lee's talking. He's like, he was so upset about this whole Spider-Man thing, everything. So you know what? I wrote him a letter that said, you can show this to anybody. And it says, I consider Steve Ditko the co-creator of Spider-Man and all these things. And he goes, he actually wrote all the stories and he did this. And if you look back, Steve Ditko actually did this. It was amazing. Stan Lee would be like, look, I never know what I was getting. I just did he would send me the art and I would do a crossword puzzle. They would plot them, and that's what we'd do. It's a Marvel method. It's very famous. That's what he would do. And he goes, when Spider-Man was created, I handed him a thing. He did the costume. Jack Kirby originally designed Spider-Man, and it looks nothing like it did now. It looks like a totally different character. Steve covered his face. He came up with this. He came up with all these things, and kept the visual look and everything. He's actually saying all these things. So he says, I wrote Steve a letter, and Steve Ditko got mad because I used the word considered. And at that point, I just gave up. So then at that moment, Jonathan Ross asked him, he says, well, do you consider Steve Ditko the co-creator of Spider-Man? And Stan Lee puts his head down and he says, I think the person who came up with the idea is actually the creator. And it's like, you put me in a tough spot here. And it's like, you're like, oh my God, really? You went through this whole thing, and now you're just saying, like, it was contradicting yourself and saying, no, I'm actually the creator. And it's actually like this wild moment, and it was captured on film. And it's like, okay, well, Stan, no one's taking away anything that you're saying, no one's saying, like, Stan Lee didn't do this. All they're just saying is give somebody else a little credit, And Stan Lee couldn't even do it. Like, even then, he was just like, look, he's like, I wrote all these things. He goes, if that's what Steve wants, that's fine, by all means. But, I think it's the person who came up with the idea. And you're like, my God, you're not even listening to yourself. But comic books has a... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So what about Bob Kane? Because from the stories that I've read, it seems like he kind of, contracted out everything and took credit for it. And I'm not clear on how good of a creator he actually was. I mean, does he deserve credit for anything?
I think Bob Kane deserves, for Batman, I will say this, for the creation of Batman himself, and, for as far as how talented Bob was, if you actually look at the original Batman stories, they're almost very crude and very, ones that he supposedly, drew whatever, they're very crude and they don't really have a lot of flash to them. What's really cool about Batman is what Bill Finger or what Jerry Robinson actually had brought into it. And that's what people were responding to. And Jerry Robinson, I actually had a chance to meet a few times before he passed, and he was a lovely man. But if you look at the stuff that Bob Kane actually done, Stan Lee, I can argue and say, okay, you know what, he's misguided, but I really think that Stan Lee, and that's one of my points on the show, is that Stan Lee actually did a lot for people. He fought for put people's names on the pages. He fought for artists and writers to put their names on them. He really took risk with a lot of people in their artwork, and really made like those choices and decided, what Marvel Comics does. I think that Stan Lee did a lot. Whether or not you like Stan Lee's act, as I like to call it, Stan did a lot. And Bob Kane, I agree that he did contract out a lot of work. And I don't think he actually. I think Bob knew what talent would get him to the next to the next place, or how to bolster his own ego, basically, or how to bolster his appearance, basically to make him look good. He's like the guy who, who I want to say, when we were in high school, didn't really do anything and had all these people around him who made him work for him, made him seem like he was doing something, or even in college or something. He's like the student council president, and everybody else does everything around him. He's just standing there, nodding his head and everything, and saying, "Oh yeah, this is what I did." And that's how I always took Bob, and I think that's why a lot of people are kind of like, "Ooh," and then took credit for everybody and being like, "Look what I did," look what I did, And to me, that I don't think that he was a creative person. I think he was a businessman. I think if you look at his art and what he's done, even as far as I remember him doing a drawing of for the Batman movie back when in 1989. He had this big thing he's showing. You look at his stuff, and you're like, oh, it's not like it's impressive. It's not like, oh my God, this guy did something. I don't think there's somebody who's extremely creative there. I think that's what a lot of people just respond to, was the fact that he likes to puff up his chest, To me, that just seems to me like the Bob Kane way. I do think he does deserve 50% of the credit for Batman. I do think that, I think it was a collaboration between Bob Kane and Bill Finger. I always think that. The rest of them, I think that, in my opinion, again, I think Bob Kane and Jerry Robinson and Bill Finger actually came up with the Joker. I don't think that Bob Kane has done anything that's made anything last, basically. Besides, helping out and being like, okay, saying like this, and then I think he could recognize talent in people to get him to where he needs to be. And I think he was very much a user, and I think that's why he has such a villainous kind of history behind him.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Coming up, Lenny talks about his Schulz play, The Man Who Saw Snoopy. Did he have trouble getting the rights to use Snoopy's name in the title? Stories of the interesting people who come out when rights issues are involved. Lenny describes how the play about Schulz's life was done in the style of the Peanuts strip, and more. But first, if you value the content on Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Polls, and want to help us move up to bigger and better things, how about donating a few bucks a month via Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics? If everyone listening gave just $3 a month, it would make a big difference. We'd be able to reach several of our Patreon goals and bring you more content, including bringing back over 120 early episodes that have long been missing from our website. Check out all our goals and rewards and make your pledge at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or you can make a one-time donation via PayPal. Send it to donate@deconstructingcomics.com.
I'm Batman.
And I'm Robin.
This is Tim.
And this is Paul.
To the Bat Polls! The iTunes reviews are in on To the Bat Polls podcast. A terrific podcast, Rave's Got a Rugrat, that brings review, film analysis, and sociological impact to episode-by-episode musings without ever losing the feeling of two brothers with towels tied around their necks, running through the backyard. Unmissable.
Exquisite.
You've heard the reviews, now try it for yourself. New episodes on the first, third, and fifth Thursdays of the month on iTunes or Stitcher, or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com.
Wild!
For nostalgia, analysis, and fun, it's
To the Bat Polls.
All right, well, let's talk about your Schulz play, The Man Who Saw Snoopy. Now, I was a little surprised, you talking about the Finger play, I know that you couldn't use any kind of Batman imagery, well, other than there's sort of a bat-shaped logo on the poster. But I was surprised that did you have to ask for the rights to use the name Snoopy in the title?
I literally went for a 2-year back and forth between the Schulz Museum and everything, where I'm like, the funny thing was that I was like, all right, they're never going to let me use it, so I don't think they're ever going to let me use it. I'm just going to kind of let it go and all these things. Until they were more concerned about the imagery. Everybody's concerned about imagery. And that was the thing. I actually when I was doing the Lucille Ball play, when I did the Buster Keaton play, I like to say, anytime you do something, there are always crazies who come out, and it's always the craziest people that you meet. And I've actually learned how to, and I think from doing Lucille Ball and doing the other plays, I knew exactly what to say to them. And so I can tell you two really quick stories that kind of led up to this. The Marx Brothers, nobody cared about the Marx Brothers. I did that show. Nobody bothered me about anything. People are like, oh, do you want to use imagery? I'm like, no, I don't need to. But when I did the Buster Keaton play, I get a call from some guy, and I actually looked him up, who ran who ran all these Kino. He's from Kino Films or just Kino Classics or whatever. And he said nobody asked me, and nothing came across my desk to use Buster Keaton or anything. And I'm like, okay, here we go. He said, you should shut this play down immediately. And I'm like, oh God, that's who it is. And I had a couple other crazies, so I did some research on. I'm like, nope, these people don't exist. Everyone suddenly had the rights to Buster Keaton's life story. And what they don't realize is that if somebody has deceased, and that people can actually write stories about you if you do it in such a manner that you don't use any imagery from any film. So say if I use something from a Buster Keaton film, I can get in trouble for that. But if I'm not using pictures or anything or that's copyrighted or anything like that, then there's nothing anyone can really do. And I've kind of looked at the legalities of it. So finding this guy, there was a Buster Keaton fan club who kind of guided me the right way and who to talk to, and I did all this research asking who did this and this, and this went on for years. I get this email from this guy, and I call them up, and I'm like, oh, he wants to shut down my plays like this, and they're like, oh God. He goes, this guy's a millionaire that you're talking to. He's a millionaire. He doesn't think he owns the rights to Buster Keaton. And I go, no. They're like, no. He thinks he owns the rights to everything that has to do with silent films.
Oh, wow.
I'm sitting there going,
wow.
Holy crap. Yeah.
No matter which studio.
No matter which studio, no matter what anything. I mean, I'm sitting there was amazed by this guy. And he kept sending me emails, and they're like, he doesn't have any legality to it. And if he actually, I think he's thinking that you're using his imagery from that he owns, because he did own some of the films. He actually owned the rights to some of the silent films. And I'm like, okay, I don't own any of the rights. And he just wasn't listening. His parties were like, I think he was like a tycoon of some sort. And he just kept emailing. So finally he's like, okay, fine. Are you putting any imagery? This is what they always say to you too. Are you putting any imagery from one of my copyrighted material in the film? Does anyone look too close to the Buster Keaton or Fatty Arbuckle or this person or this person? I'm like, nope. All right, nothing I can do to you. I'm like, yeah, nothing you can do to me. I know. And the Lucille Ball one was the one I was really scared about. So I'm like, they're going to shut me down so badly at this point. And so I get a call from a guy's name, and I'll say his name. It was Bruce Braun, and he controls the Desilu, what's it called? And the estate. The guy's the nicest guy in the world. He calls me up and he's like, oh, he calls me up and he's like, hey, I need to check this stuff and everything because, and I'm like, what's funny is that this guy, of course, emailing him for years or 2 years, and finally out of the blue, he calls you one day on a Thursday afternoon, like nothing's going on. And he's like, hey, are you using any imagery from Lucille Ball or anything like that? And any of the plays, any of the shows? And I'm like, nope. He goes, does your actress or anybody look like too much like Ricky Ricardo or look like Lucille Ball? I'm like, no. He's like, have a good opening night. Basically, that was my interview. I'm like, no, I can record it for you. He's like, nope. As long as you're not putting your image up there, we don't care. You can have 20 Lucille Balls. And I'm like, okay, great, that's fantastic.
So with Snoopy, with Snoopy, they didn't care if you used the name, just as long as there wasn't a picture of Snoopy.
They didn't care as long as I didn't use a picture of Snoopy, or they didn't care as long as I didn't use the comic strips, or anything to do with the cartoons or anything like that. They didn't seem to care. I said, try to get the rights to that, and it actually went through a lot more wrangling than I would have than the other ones, just because they were very like the Schultz Museum. Finally, they're like, well, people can. My point was, I'm like, well, people can call their dog Snoopy. I can sue everybody who does that. And they're like, so it kind of went back and forth. And finally, I said, look, I'll thank you guys profusely. and do this, do it like this, do it like this. I'm like, this is what I'm using it for. I'm just using it for a, But I said, in my opinion, it's just like writing an unauthorized bio or something like that, or doing something like this. And like, you get a point. They're like, finally, I get a letter that says, go ahead and use it. And I'm like, oh my god, this thing. I think at a certain point, just kind of got tired of me emailing them. So like, you're just gonna keep emailing until it gets the title. So I think that was part of it. So I mean, that went through and that was fine. And the other one I was actually kind of worried about it was the Bill Finger one too. When I was doing the play, when I was doing it as a screenplay initially, Mark Nobleman says you're never going to get the screenplay produced. You realize this? And I said, why is that? And he says, well, because when you're doing a play, it's a little different than doing a film. With film, there has to be certain things. Everybody's going to come out of the woodwork and want their piece of the pie. Nobody cares about theater as much. So if I put something in theater, like something about Bob Kane, something like that, no one's going to really bother it because it's not something that someone considers like a permanent thing, basically. With film, they consider it a permanent thing, so they're like, okay, well, we want our money, basically, because we know there's money in Hollywood film. So, and that's always been the scare. He says, well, unless you get Steven Spielberg to produce it, you're probably going to be out of luck. And I'm like, okay, if that's a challenge, then sure. But that's always been the issue. But no, when you do theater, a lot of the times when you play, people are a little more responsive to it, and a little more willing to bend the rules. As long as, again, you don't put an image up there, you'll be fine. That was one of the things I was actually concerned about too, because I was very concerned about playing a Ditko play. So he's still alive, and I'm like, oh my god, And Ditko's the kind of guy who just doesn't give a shit. He doesn't care. He just doesn't care. Like, I don't know if you know the history behind him. Hopefully, you can bleep that out. But Ditko just was like, I'm like, so I emailed Robin Schneider. And Robin Snyder said, Robin Snyder was like, I'm going to keep forwarding on to him, let him know, because I want to write a play. And I sent them the first 20 pages of it, actually. And I said, I really just want to, I'm not doing it to, like, upset Steve. I'm just doing it because I think it'd be a really good story to tell. And, I don't know him. I'm not one with Steve Ditko had a long history of people who sit outside his door and wait for him, basically. And they knock on his door, his fans, and they wait outside. And, they want to see what this guy looks like. I said, I'm not going to be doing that. I don't really, want to. He wants to be private for a reason. I said, can you just let him know that if he has a problem with me doing it, then I won't do it. And I gave Stan Lee's people the same thing, but it's not going to be as much of a problem. I can always change the name, so if it's Steve and Stan, it could be anybody. So I sat there, and I was like, okay, here we go. And I'm not, I'm like, here we go. I'm like, if Steve Ditko was really like, I don't want you to do it, then I wouldn't do it. And I got something back that basically gave me the nod to go ahead and do it. And I was like, okay, cool. So that is why I said I had to do this, because if you have an opportunity where someone says good luck to you, basically, that means you're not getting it away, and I'm just going to go for it and see what happens from there. Mm-hmm. And and that's kind of where I'm at with this one right now. So yeah, hopefully I answered your questions in a long-winded way.
So what inspired you to write a play about Charles Schulz?
Charles Schulz. You know what? I've always loved Peanuts. I think Peanuts is the one comic strip. I've read every strip, collected them, everything. I think Peanuts is the one strip where it's just, if you look at what Charles Schulz did, he created something. He did this. He had a strip out every day for 50 years. I mean, it was 1952. Actually, for 47 years, I think it was. Because Peanuts.
It was just short of 50. Folks. Yeah. Well, yeah. Plus the little folks' time. I'm not sure how long that was, but Peanuts itself was about 50.
Yeah, about 50. Yeah. But you look at this guy who went to work every day, and he created such a universe in those little lines, and it's relatable to everybody. Relatable. Peanuts was just something that when you open up the Sunday papers, it's there. They're there for the holiday specials. They're there for this, and to me, you've got a guy who basically communicated through his strips. Mm-hmm. He communicated his entire life to that. That's where he lived. And to me, that was the most beautiful tale you've ever wanted to tell in your life. And there are so many things. I mean, he was somebody who, if if you really look at it, was just a genuinely decent person overall, and tried to promote decent things through his scripts. And I mean, it was the simplest things he could do was make people laugh, and he did. And there'll never be a strip like it. There'll never a strip like it, and never will be another one like it again. To be encapsulated in that little like snow globe of that strip, you go in there and it's like, you felt like that was just a second home for you. I just loved it. I mean, it was, as a kid I loved it. As an adult I loved it even more. And his story was very fascinating about a guy who literally throughout his entire life, the concept for the entire script was everything he did in his life, he just couldn't kick that football himself. And that was Charles Schulz. He couldn't kick the football. And to actually be able to demonstrate that on stage was an honor, actually. That I'll never forget. Being doing that strip of him at the drawing table, doing all these things, and it was. You also had a guy who put his feelings on the script too, and how he felt, and it's just a wonderful story. If you ever don't want to read it, I'll let you read it. But it was one of the most unbelievable times I've ever had during a script, and I was just fortunate to be able to do it. Peanuts is an American classic, and it's an American cartoon, and you say Peanuts to anybody, and they will enjoy it. And to be able to do the play in the style too of a Peanut strip was really cool as well. I'll never forget that time period. I got to do that, any of those plays.
So what in the style of a Peanut strip?
Well, it was it was a bio play. I mean, there would be times where people would be talking and be talking about something really sad, and they would go over and they would sit on the wall and they would sit on the wall and they would put their heads down, and it kind of had that idea, like like the career, like that's Charlie Brown and Linus and everything like that. And there were times when there was a really really kind of a sad moment, and then all of a sudden like a really happy moment, and the characters would just dance, and I kind of did Charles Schulz in his life, and it was very, very done very seriously. But then something fantastic would happen that will remind you of the Peanut strip, basically. The opening of the play basically was Charles Schulz coming out silently, and there's a girl who was his very first wife, and she's holding the football, and and he misses the football. Of course, he tries to jump for it, and that kind of gives our beginning and our end of the show. And as it goes along, you start realizing that his first wife was actually the inspiration for Lucy, and he found her kind of mean and everything. But he actually was living through his strip, and what I mean by that, though, he was actually having an affair on his wife, basically, and he was putting it in the strip. And if you actually look at it, it was unbelievable.
Yes,
he was. I don't know if you ever heard the story or not.
Yeah, I read it was in the David Michaelis bio of Schulz.
Oh yeah. If you ever read that, you're like, oh my gosh, he was putting it in the strip. I've actually seen like some of the things that people were showing me stuff, and like people were writing to me about this. And I actually saw this, some of the stuff he sent. I forget her name now. They sent his
Tracy,
his mistress. Yeah. And he was sending her pictures of Charlie Brown saying, "Does she love me?" And like, I hope so. And you're like, oh my God, he's sending Peanut characters to his mistress. And you kind of go like, oh my God, you can't believe this is actually happening, but it was. And but it's also, I mean, basically it's almost, if you read the Michaelis book, I mean, there's some really dark things that happen in there too, and that he's done. But he's also somebody who was almost like a child. So like he was Charlie Brown, and to me that's always the best kind of art. Somebody who personalizes what they do, and it's only to them, but it then makes it universal. That's amazing. There'll never be another one like him, though, as far as I remember. I mean, it never will be. Even like someone like Chester. That's what I love about comic book artists. There'll never be someone like Chester Gould. There'll never be someone like Jeff Smith. There'll never be somebody like Kevin Eastman. I'll tell you that much. I wish I could do that play right away, but I do have a Kevin Eastman story if you ever want to hear it.
I just found
Kevin Eastman.
on Vanity Fair there's a reference to how he referred to his affair in the strips. So this is quoting from Associated Press announcement.
Yeah.
It says, in two letters from 1970, Schulz writes that he must cease calling Tracy Claudius because his long-distance phone calls to her had been discovered by his wife. Soon after, he created a strip in which Charlie Brown berated Snoopy for his obnoxious behavior when he's not allowed to go out, quote, to see that girl Beagle. In subsequent panels, Charlie warned Snoopy, quote, you'd better start behaving yourself, unquote. And when Snoopy picks up the telephone, Charlie Brown yells, quote, and stop making those long-distance phone calls.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what his wife said to him, actually. It's unbelievable. And it's actually more if you dig deep enough. You're like, oh, Lord. Like I said, I've actually seen the stuff that he's done, and he actually made the comparisons. And it's just like, you're like, oh, my God. Like, you're like, how can he? And what's interesting to me, though, he based his wife on Lucy. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the strips and you read them, after like the first 20, I think 17 or 20 years of their marriage, when they separate and divorce, Lucy becomes not as mean in the strips. She actually becomes more of like a nuisance, but not like generally like because in the first the first strips, the original ones, she was pretty damn brutal.
Well, I know that some of those strips where she between her and Schroeder is Schultz and his wife, and like where she throws Schroeder's piano down the sewer. That's attacking his art.
Absolutely.
This is Joyce did with Schultz in his view.
That's what she did. Joyce did that, and it's like you look at that and you're like, oh Lord. But that to me. That to me is always what's been fascinating about him. He just did it, But you look at it, the way he secluded himself. He kind of had no other course of action except his strip, basically, and that's kind of where he lived. He didn't really have. I mean, if he had a social life, it wasn't anything normal, But he would do that every day, and it's like he would go in, do his thing, and then go back to the strip, and that's what he would do, and that's where he lived, and so it makes sense to me that he would do that because it's kind of like he had to put it out somewhere. But at a certain point, it almost became like his journal on a live stage,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you have any?
That's fascinating.
Did you have any contact with the Schultz family when you were writing this?
I think they wanted to be. Kind of left out of the loop. I did get I got some really nice contacts in the museum. That's who really owns the rights now. They had some really nice people, but I think most of them are kind of like not to say they're not interested in what they're if whoever's still around. It's not that they're not interested. I just don't think they really want a part of it, kind of thing. Like kind of say, oh yeah, we're doing this thing, And it kind of turns out like that because it's funny because, a lot of these people, existed, not even 100 years ago, and now like a lot of the descendants are kind of like, they're part of that, but they kind of, not to say they distance themselves from it. And I can understand if they want to live their own lives, but, no, I haven't really heard from anything. The only time I think I ever heard, besides Athena, Finger, the only time I think I've ever heard of somebody really reaching out again. We had to. I mean, and it could be anything. Like you do a play about somebody's going to come out and it'll be nutty things. You get people who say like, "Look, Buster Keaton was my grandfather," and all the things. You do research, you're like, "Oh my God, these people are insane." But it's always. I mean, you literally tell someone you're doing a bioplay, and all the nuts come out. It's fantastic. But I think the only time I think that I had a friend who I guess who did older fellow. He actually had done some stage work with Harpo Marx actually, and so that was pretty cool. I mean, as far as things, but not really. I think most of the times when you do a bioplay, most of the time, you don't really hear from family or anything like that. And you don't really get to see them. Most of them are kind of like faded into the woodwork of the world right now. To kind of disappear after a while, but it'd be kind of cool. I love someone come see it and be like, oh yeah, there you go. But you don't always get that, which is the way it goes sometimes. But
so what were your sources for the Schultz play?
Basically, I did everything I could to read every biography that had possibly been written about him. And honestly, my biggest source was basically just finding a timeline and kind of like relating it to the strip in that timeline. So I mean, it was mostly McCallis's book was very helpful, but there were some other ones too. But I think a lot of times there was actually a book that was actually very, very helpful too, from the Schulz Museum actually, that actually contained all the strips of Little Folks. I don't know if you ever read that.
The strips of what?
Little Folks. It came directly from the museum. You actually had to order it from the museum actually. And there's some. And I asked him, like, "Can you send me everything you have? I'll pay for it. I don't care." So like, sure, whatever. And so he actually sent us these books, and it had a lot of information in them. That I was like, "Whoa, I didn't know this." All these things. So I kind of dug through them voraciously. Like when I attack a subject, I try to find everything I can about the subject. Even if there's nothing, you have to find something. So I mean, I would dig, and I was obsessed with it. And it actually is kind of fun too, because you get to say, "Oh my God, look at this!" This is what he drew before. I mean, I have stuff he did. I have stuff he did for the church. There's actually a book out there that he drew. He actually did a newspaper for his church, and they have a book out there for it. And it's I have to find where it is. But yeah, he has all these strips that like. He's drawing adult-sized humans. You're like, oh my God, Schulz can actually draw humans, besides kids, and it is amazing. You're like, oh, it's almost like shocking at first. You're like, oh my God, this is what a human will look like for Schulz. Bring me back, But I've seen those strips, and I'm like, wow, that's really cool, And so something you wouldn't. That's the coolest part, I think, too.
Yeah, it is weird to see him drawing adults. It's just like, what?
Yeah, you're like, well, I actually sat there for a second. I'm like, what's going on? Yeah, exactly. You're like, what is this? I don't quite understand. But then you try to understand, and you're like, oh, I guess, But all these books, the thing that's important is to read all the prologues, so you get stuff from people who have met him and all these different things, and you kind of form your own opinion of him too. And then you have to be, when you're writing too, you have to get into their heads to be like, okay, what was he thinking? Like, what was it done? McCallis's book, I thought, and I always said I thought his was very well researched. But he did very good research. The only thing I was like, well, maybe there's some things about Charles Schulz I don't need to know.
Well, Schultz's son Monty was really upset by that book. And
was he really?
And he had worked with McCallis a lot on answering his questions and whatever, helping with his research. And then when the book came out.
Yeah, I think I heard this.
Monty Schulz wrote like a 50-page article in the Comics Journal about how he felt it was very inaccurate and that he felt that it focused too much on Schultz's love life and the size of his bank account, was too kind of focused too narrowly on certain things, and kind of that it. He felt that McCallis was trying to make the story fit his own kind of preconceived idea about it.
And I can see that. I actually felt. I mean, I didn't think it was that extreme. I'm sure anytime when I was actually doing co-creator, the same thing happened. Like Athena, I can understand it. Athena was not upset, but she had concerns about one of the scenes where Bill fights with his wife Portia. And she was kind of upset by it, and she says, well, this is what I feel about this and this and this and this, and after a while, her and I had a conversation about it, and I said, well, and she said something that was really interesting. She said, it's tough, at first you think about it, and I can just imagine how it must feel now. You think about it, and you're like, wow, it sounds great on paper kind of thing, but when you actually see the actualization of it, it's almost like you're like, wow, this is my grandparents, and my grandparents are fighting in front of me, and nobody wants to see their grandparents fighting in front of them. This is really funny, and but I think that might be part of it too. But my opinion of it too, and I actually heard this right. I actually haven't read his response, and it'd be kind of interesting. I should probably go back and read it. Because I didn't focus on the McCallis book, only the facts, not the. I didn't want the psychology of, you're like, oh, well, Schulz never felt he was good in bed, and you're like, Jesus Christ, can we just get away from this? There was a couple of points. I think about the 15, 20 pages. I mean, you can just get us from this book.
Yeah, his son might have been a little too close to the subject.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I think it's a combination of both. I do think McCallis did a good job, but at the same token, I was kind of like, oh, geez. And but that's what I try to do. I said, my point of the show was these things happened. And you have to see it from his eyes of why they happened. And he was almost like a child in some regards. You know, I mean, you have to figure he spent his entire day drawing, drawing these kids, these kids doing their things and thinking them up and doing all these things. And then he profited pretty well from it.
Oh yeah.
And because the deal, what's that?
Is that he made a lot of money off of that for sure.
He made a lot of money off of it, and then you got to figure, he created tennis courts on his land. He created an ice rink. He did all these things, and then everything he drew, he just kept. That's what he had to do all day was think about 3 or 4 panels putting together. I mean, and he would make a lot of tons of money and sign off on this and sign off on this, and you got to look at it this way, and then like that's going to affect your brain somehow. I mean, even mentally. Yeah, and I always think about this comparison. People ask me, like, what do you think people's state of minds are? I'm like, well, you got to look at it this way. Tom Cruise, people are like, Tom Cruise is crazy. I'm like, of course Tom Cruise is crazy. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, this guy has been making, like millions of dollars since 1983. Past the 1990s, he's been making, like, $70 million minimum per year. Can do whatever he wants. That's going to affect you somehow. It's the same thing with like Charles Schulz. It's got to affect him somehow. He's sitting there all day doing these things, come up with 4 panels and him telling everyone he's brilliant. He's always like, well, I can't take a break. That's got to affect something. And the most telling thing for me though was when he quit his last strip. When he finally, the day before the last strip was published, he passed. Mm-hmm. And I think, that to me, this tells you that was his entire life. That's all he ever wanted to do. That's all he ever was. And, and that to me is, again, a very telling thing about who this person was. Mm-hmm. And what he did in his life to basically be who he was, and who he always ended up being was, again, someone who never really, you couldn't separate the strip from him. He was that.
So, writing a play or a movie about historical events, I mean, even Shakespeare would change the story somewhat to make it, fit drama better. Have you had to kind of make any embellishments or changes in any of your bio plays?
You have to. I mean, I tell people this. The problem is with doing a bio play, and doing anything biographical, and I think even like someone like David McCallis, or even someone who's like, anybody would tell you this, is that, life happens and nobody's there to document them. So even by the first sentence of somebody saying things, doing dialogue or whatever, no one was really there to record these things unless they're on like YouTube or you find them like a thing. So you have to, in theory, just make them up and try to get as close to the truth as possible. And what your story is about. I mean, embellishments. Everything's going to be an embellishment, no matter what you do. The thing you have to do is keep close to the heart of it and hope you hit on that target that you're aiming for. I try to get as factual as possible, but I know it's going to be impossible no matter what you do, because I wasn't there. Especially with something like it's probably sounds weird, but it's very tough for something like Bill Finger, and it's very, very, because, there's not a lot written about him, about his temperament. There was maybe 11 pictures in existence, I think. And, half of them he's turning away from the camera anyway. But, you're doing all this research and you're looking at all these things. And, but you have to find out just like the basic framework of what the story is and go from there and try to fit those in, because, you're going to be making up conversations no matter what you do. If you're doing a bio on something, it's going to be fictionalized no matter what you do. Unless somebody's following you around like the Truman Show your entire life, you're not going to hit it exactly 100%. But the idea though is to find it as truthful as possible. What I can't stand is what I end up seeing a lot of times is that you get biographies that are so off their mark that they obviously had a story they wanted to fit in, and that's what they do. I think the only person who I think can get away with that, with doing like the artistic, bio basically, is Martin Scorsese. Actually, I think he comes because he's actually an artist. I think who can actually make a film that feels within that tone of what you're looking for. But that's why I think it's such a tricky trope to do, because a lot of them fall apart and a lot of them don't make money or whatever in the box office. is because people make the embellishments and everything, and they think it's what people want to see. The latest thing that just bombed at the box office, you probably haven't heard of it, was a film called Bleed for This. I don't know if you've heard about this.
What's it called?
It's called Bleed for This.
Bleed for This. No.
Yeah, you haven't heard of it. It's another boxing movie. Have you heard of The Fighter with Mark Wahlberg?
Maybe I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a boxing film. Christian Bale won an Oscar for it. Mark Wahlberg's in it.
Okay.
And it was a success. And so basically all these other boxing movies came down the line, like Southpaw with Jake Gyllenhaal. Mm-hmm. And they're boxing films, they're biofilms. And they don't work as well, and people are wondering about it. Why? But because now they're trying to fit every boxer's life story into that formula, and it doesn't fit. And then people can't figure out why it doesn't. They keep losing the kernel of truth, trying to find that come from behind story that they really want, basically. And that's the danger of doing bio plays and doing bio scripts and doing bio anything, is that if you don't stay true to it, you have to, with every bio script you make, and this is how I always tell people, the only reason I'll do them, is you have to make it true unto itself. And no matter what the story is, you have to make it dramatically as true in that framework of what's presented to you, rather than trying to fit it to your agenda. Because once you get your agenda going, you've already done yourself a disservice. Mm-hmm. And that's it. That's the only thing you can do. So I do think the Schulz play works. I think, and the reason I have to redo the finger play is because, again, he got credit, and I have to stay true to the facts. I would love to keep the original script and embellish that more, make it something, but it's not true anymore. And it's turned from a script about a guy who didn't get credit to a guy who basically suffered his entire life and never knew that he was going to receive credit. It really is amazing, like how and that changes the entire scope of what I had to do, and I had to be loose with that. So that's the deals you get in the bios and everything. I love doing them. And I love the idea of it always keeps. I love it alive, like keeping things alive as well.
Yeah. Well, the finger case is kind of an extreme case of what I wanted to ask about. This my next question, but I was thinking as I was reading a review of the Schulz play, how in comics is a medium where you do it once and you put it out and maybe people write reviews of it, but you can't go back and change it. Whereas with a play, is you can start performing it and then maybe have a different thought about it, or somebody else makes a comment that you take to heart, and you could, for the next performance, do it differently. Yep. So, I mean, how much do your productions evolve from the first performance to the last? Because you direct also. Is it kind of set in stone once the rehearsal's over, or how does that work?
Yeah, what I like to tell people is you gotta be loose, because a lot of times you can be rehearsing a play, or you can be doing anything, even like a movie for 6 years, and someone's going to come along. You premiere the movie, you do whatever you do, and somebody comes along and says, what would have made this good? You put this there. You put this piece there. And you're just like, God, that is so true. And you sit there and you're like, oh my God. And that's the thing that's really hard about film, because everything's permanent at that point. With a play, you're right. You can change things. So a lot of times you'll be sitting there and somebody will come along and give you a review. You also have to be canny enough to realize, okay, this reviewer just doesn't like something or this person doesn't like something because they don't like that.
Right. You can't please everybody.
You can't please everybody, but there comes a point where if somebody says something that hits you in the gut, then you're like, okay, maybe I should consider this. And that actually happened on the Man Who Saw Snoopy. Someone came in, gave a review, and I said, oh my God, they're right. And I forgot what it was. Oh yeah, it was a couple. I said, we could just cut this out, and it would be stronger. And we did, and it was stronger. And I mean, so that to me is part of the greatest thing about theater, is that you can make something stronger. You can change things. When we did the Lucille Ball show, we had done it twice, and we did it once here in November, and then we took it into New York the next summer, and there were things I changed. There were many things I changed, and what was cool though was that a lot of the actors did more research, and they changed their performances, so it actually became something that was very alive and very real. And but that's also the reason why too I want to change the Bill Finger script, the co-creator, because I feel like I hit something really good there, but I feel like I had something more I could do. And that's the first time I actually felt really strongly, I'm like, I could make this a better play. I had I really do want to focus on. I actually have a really fun concept for it too. Was that since he's got the credit, the play starts off in 1966, and it starts off with Jerry Bales. I don't know if you ever heard the story that he confronted Bill Finger, saying, I know you created Batman. I want to get it all on tape, and so we can actually, get this out there. And he wrote the article, "If the Truth Be Told," about Bill Finger and everything. And it starts off with that interview, and then it flashes back to the late 30s, and we see Bill Finger and Bob Kane, getting together as friends. They knew each other in high school. They went to the same high school, but never really knew each other. And Bob Kane hiring them, and then the whole creation of Batman and everything. And then they're talking about it, and it kind of goes, and it kind of gives you the thing. And then you realize what the play is actually about at this point is that, after he sells Batman, it becomes a very, almost like a thriller. I actually call it, it's funny because I actually said, now it's turned into a staged version of the play Misery without the foot cutting. Basically, you have a guy, you have Bill Finger and Jerry Roberson working for Bill Finger, and they literally are watching as this guy is taking away everything that is theirs, basically every idea that they have, everything else, and he's almost like it becomes a very like abusive, scary environment, which is kind of almost the kind of what had happened, and and you watch Bill Finger's deterioration and trying to find hope in this almost kind of like hopeless situation. And it does go through where he's gone, from that point on. But that is basically the script. You don't want to leave that creation room. You want to see what actually happened between Bob Kane and Bill Finger. So let's make that happen. This was my idea. So and it does lead to everything else that happened throughout his life, and it talks about that. But to me, that's a much more stronger concept than what I had, which was going from the 30s to the 60s. No, this kind of gives it more depth, I think. So I actually feel very strongly about where it's going now. It's going to be a really cool play once it debuts. Plus, it takes place in one location too, which is really kind of interesting. So that's for next year. So
okay.
Yeah.
So now
you're all excited. You're like, oh my god.
when you're writing these plays and directing them, when they're producing them for the Daydream Theater Company, right?
Yep.
And this is at you mentioned the new theater, the Arctic Playhouse.
Yep, it's going on there, a lot of them. But the what's going on? I'm sorry, you had a question, but the Arctic.
I was just going to say it's in West Warwick, Rhode Island. But go ahead.
Yes, and we do shows there. But I also want to take the co-creator to New York because I think it would there's a bigger audience that is not just locally but bigger. So that's why I take stuff to New York. I take them to theater festivals and I try to produce them out there. So I'm talking to theaters right now about bringing that down there. And again, I really am kind of pushing for the Comic Con in San Diego. Mm-hmm. I'll be honest with you, if San Diego accepted it this year to be a panel in there or to do something like that, I would immediately go. I think it's a very valuable piece of history, to be honest with you. That comic fans could see it. You're right. I don't think anything's ever been done like that.
Well, I mean,
before.
I can almost imagine it setting a precedent where cons would start to regularly do plays instead of panels. That would be interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really we go to these comic conventions a lot of times. And this is kind of my selling point. And I think there's still a place for panels. But
sure.
But someone once said it to me. I was sitting next to him, and it says, "This is kind of like being at home on the TV except live." And it's like watching a DVD extras but live. And I said, "Yeah, it's kind of cool. With the same token, it's kind of nice." But I do think there would be a place for that where people should be getting new entertainment, not clips of entertainment, and seeing a live performance, and maybe seeing some. I hate to say this. What would be really cool is to have again, instead of actors, going up there and promoting their play or whatever, having them do a story about Bill Finger, having them do a story about this, or just have nobodies do it or anything, and have people come see that room and be like, oh my God, this actually has a place for here, especially theater because it's so malleable too. It's like, and I'll be honest with you, if not just myself, but I mean, I have a Bill Finger play, I have a Ditko play, I have a Schulz play, and all these other things. And I'll be honest with you, I say this every time I see Kevin Eastman, I would love to write it. I would love if he just said, Lenny, write the Kevin Eastman play. Kevin Eastman actually introduced one of my shows, actually, summer, which was pretty cool of him. And it was really nice. It was very nice. He did an audio recording for a play I did called The Social Avenger. It was very sweet. And of course, I'm like, hey, how about that bio play? It's like, one day. So I would love to do a bio play creation of the Turtles. But I think it'd be kind of neat to see something like that and kind of like, see these historical things. And even if it's not an hour and a half play, just do like a 30-minute presentation of what brought us to these conventions, And that to me would be very interesting. Now, these are the foundations upon which these all rest upon.
Yeah. Have there been any? You mentioned some of your plays have been published. Do you know of like other productions of them elsewhere?
Some of my funny enough, my bio plays are huge. There's huge commitment and everything like that, and they're a huge thing. But to be honest with you, a lot of people, when they love to talk about doing them, then they realize the work of actually doing them, and they're like, "Oh, the heck with that." I'll be honest with you. The thing that's very tough about them a lot of times is because they are very specific, and you can't fudge them. Because if you fudge them, people will know. So like when we're doing a play like about Lucille Ball, you have to have an actress who looks like Lucille Ball. Otherwise, it loses all credibility.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing. That was a very tough one too, because I needed to find somebody who looked like Ricky Ricardo. And Gio Castellano is an actor. If you ever get a chance, look him up. Came along and he literally could do Ricky Ricardo. Like you would think Ricky Ricardo was in the room with you. An actress and Andrea Flax did the Lucille Ball. She won an award for it. She was just brilliant. And she could do it. And then we had to, cast the other ones. People look like that. So it's consistently, constantly, and for me, I tried to direct them too much. The reason I kept saying, this is my last one, there came a point where I was in the Schultz play, and I was like, I love the way it came out. I said, this is just perfect. The show came out at the end, perfect for what I wanted it to be, as close to perfect as I would like it to be, just to experience. And I said, I never want to direct another one. Someone said, why? Because I said, at a certain point at the end of the shows, I was killing celebrities, basically. And that's what it turns into. And, but then I would say, okay, well, there's another subject I like to do because I love bio and I love doing those things. So a lot of times people don't want to, they get very excited about the possibility of doing it. And then they become very oh my God, there's actually work that needs to be done. And there was a time where Tuna Conventions talked to me. I think there was one in Texas, and there was one, I think in Ohio, where we really want to do the Bill Finger script. I'm like, yeah. So I sent it to them. They're like, we'll get back to you. And I'm like, and I never heard from them. So then I followed up, and I'm like, well, do you want me to bring some actors? And they're like, yeah, we don't have budget for it. We would love to do it, but it's a huge what commitment it would be. And I'm like, well, I would do it, but I just didn't have time at that point. Plus, I needed to rewrite it. But the version I'm writing that I just told you about the Bill Finger script, is actually done with 4 actors, so it can actually be much easily done and more compact, rather than something that's going to be a sprawling epic, which is still going to be a sprawling epic, but it'll be more containable, something that you can pick up and bring it places, basically. And that's kind of the idea behind it now, too.
Mm-hmm.
Make it something that people can see and do and actually see what it was like to be in that room. The thing I like about it shows what it was like for Bill Finger to be in that room with Bob Kane. And we put the camera on there and we don't leave. So we get to see everything that guy suffered for the entire play. And it's really brutal. It's really a brutal show to watch. It was then, but it's even more brutal now because now we just don't turn away from it. And I'm very excited. I love to beat the heck out of actors on stage and just emotionally abuse them. So it's going to be a lot of fun for me.
Okay. So where can people find you on the internet or find out more information about you or your plays?
Well, they can go to the one thing they can go to is Indie Theater Now. That has my all the plays that I've presently published. They can Google me if they want to. Believe it or not, I'm at 5,000 Facebook friends, so they won't let me add anybody. If you message me, believe it or not, I have a fan page though. Lenny Schwartz and Leonard Schwartz and Daydream Theater Company. They can find me there. They can find me through my email. They can find me through the Arctic Playhouse usually. And I'm on Twitter too, but I don't use it as much. I just can't figure it out. Interestingly enough, I don't even use software or word process. I still use an old computer that just saves Word documents. I don't even use script writing programs.
Mm-hmm.
Even though for my director for my last film, it's like you've sold like 7 screenplays or 8 screenplays. You should probably learn final draft. I'll make you a copy. I'm like, I don't want to. It's lazy. So but yeah, you can find me if you Google me. I'm usually around. Like I said, if you find an email for me, you certainly can. I'm not in the phone book, but like I said, message me on Twitter, message me on Facebook. I can't add you, but I can just just respond. That's basically the best way to find me at this point.
Okay.
And I answer all my emails too. So if you email me, I'll find it, whether it's in 2 to 3 months, hopefully.
Thanks to Lenny Schwartz for coming on the show. Write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look us up on Patreon, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. Last Thursday, Critiquing Comics returned, and Mulele and I discussed Eisenhorn, Xenos, based on the series of novels by Dan Abnett and leading into an Eisenhorn video game. Find it right here in this podcast feed. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us, and Mulele and I will critique it on Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and please try to keep it to about 30 pages. You may also have noticed that on Saturday I republished episode 68 from March 2007, when Brandon and I discussed Charles Burns' Black Hole. Interesting to compare our take to the one Kumar and Dana did a few weeks ago. This coming Thursday on To the Bat Poles, Paul and I examined Jay Thompson's script Hickory Dickory Dock, which was greatly edited by Charles Hoffman to become the Impractical Joker arc in the 2nd season of Batman. Is this version better or worse than what was filmed? We compare the two and discuss reasons for the changes, with commentaries contributed by listeners. Look up To the Bat Poles wherever you find your podcasts or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. Next week on this show, Kumar and I discuss the mountain climbing manga, The Summit of the Gods. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.